My message has been, I'm both a fiscal hawk and a defense hawk, and I think America First represents both with peace through strength. So Doge is going to cut fat where we need to, and we're going to reprioritize on the right things. So it's not about a fixed dollar amount, Brian. It's about addressing the president's priorities: Golden Dome, southern border, modernization, hypersonics, UUVs, UAVs, the fight of the future against China. They know we're serious, and we're building for that.
There was all kinds of, well, we long for peace. Well, we want a cooperative relationship with China. It sounds very familiar, but we're preparing for war. But the interviewer said, how much more do you need? He didn't say, we don't need more. But he said, we're fiscal hawks. We can cut that, but we need to invest in these priorities. Brian, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, he says, if you want peace, prepare for war. The U.S. has been at constant war throughout its entire history, including all throughout the 21st century, including all throughout the previous Trump administration and all throughout this current Trump administration. President Trump has sent thousands of bombs to Israel to continue annihilating the Palestinian people. The U.S. itself has dropped bombs under the Trump administration on Somalia, Yemen, and Syria that I know of. And up until now, just this week, the Trump administration had been supplying all of the weapons that were on their way to Ukraine, could have stopped it at any moment. He allowed that flow of weapons to continue. He also continued providing intelligence, surveillance, targeting, acquisition information, and reconnaissance to the Ukrainians, not just to carry out HIMARS operations within what was considered Ukraine's 2014 borders, pre-2014 borders, but also deep drone strikes into Russia, which are almost certainly using the US-based Starlink network. So the Trump administration has been at constant war. So what is he talking about? If we want peace, prepare for war. It's more like we pretend we want peace while at constant war. That's what he should have said if he was being honest. And he's talking about peace through strength. Again, the US has been at constant war. If you look at the US vis-a-vis China, there is already a war taking place through proxies. The US maintains a network of terrorist organizations all around the globe that are attacking China, Chinese interests, Chinese-built infrastructure with partner nations, Chinese engineers. There was an attempt on a Chinese ambassador in Pakistan. These are all US-backed militants the US is using to destroy Chinese infrastructure and kill Chinese people. There is already a war taking place at this moment. It continues under the Trump administration. I just posted a video about Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as far as I know, voluntarily chosen by President Trump, condemning Thailand for sending Uyghur terror suspects back to China. And he's saying these are poor, innocent Uyghurs. They're picked on because of their ethnicity and their religion. And because Thailand has done this, Uyghur terrorists are probably going to attack Thailand. I'm not kidding. That is literally what happened. And so this is the Trump administration still deeply involved in this proxy war with China that is already ongoing, already killing Chinese people, already targeting Chinese infrastructure. It continues uninterrupted under the Trump administration. And he's saying, we don't want war with China, but if you really look at what he's saying all China has to do is submit to us in the Indo-Pacific region. Look at a map. America is not located in Asia. It is literally on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. It has to cross an entire ocean to get there and provoke conflict and confrontation with China. They complain in the think tanks about the tyranny of distance because of just how far they have to go to provoke this conflict and pursue this conflict with China. And the US has tens of thousands of troops deployed closer to China than to America's own shores. And in some cases, literally inside internationally recognized Chinese borders. US right now has US troops on Taiwan. Right now, they do. And so how is this a desire for genuine peace? What it is a desire for China to submit to the US, to submit to its encroachment, to submit to the way of governance the US wants to impose on China, which ultimately is a system of control to actually exercise control over China. So this is what he's actually saying. China has every right to defend itself against this encroachment. By the way, the exact same type of encroachment that triggered the war in Ukraine that President Trump is pretending he's so upset about and wants to end. They are pursuing it openly with China right now under the Trump administration, but it is a continuation of what was going on under the Biden administration. I'm not saying that one or the other is better or worse. I'm saying they're all equally as bad. They're all pursuing continuity of agenda. Ultimately, their presidential campaigns were all funded by the same handful of special interests. What I'm trying to wake people up to.
The U.S. military was in live fire drills with the South Korean military, and it ended up there was an accidental, quote unquote, strike on a residential home because you had, I believe it was fighter jets flying over Korea. This has real consequences. You have on the one hand, you have the Trump administration saying it wants peace. At the same time that Secretary of Hegseth is saying prepare for war with China, Donald Trump also essentially said let's just eliminate all of the Palestinians in Gaza. They're conducting the U.S. bombers are flying with Israeli jets, conducting operations, and so this is all happening as Trump is pivoting away from Ukraine. So talk about this overall, you call it continuity of agenda, but I think a lot of people are getting very caught up in a very early phase of things. Talk about this longer term issue. We even just have tariffs on China immediately. They're the ones that aren't getting paused. So there's obviously something going on with China. Trump definitely has his sights set on China. Canada, Mexico, all of them have been delayed, but not China.
I'll start with this incident in South Korea. This is actually one of the things that woke me up and got me out of the U.S. military. I've been in the U.S. Marines since I was 17 years old, and this pretty much everything that I saw upon joining contradicted everything that I thought the U.S. stood for. And when I came to Thailand, the very first time was for a joint U.S.-Thai military exercise called Cobra Gold. And I remember the U.S. shooting artillery rounds, 100-pound artillery rounds over people's houses. And I was like, how are you allowed to do this? We would never be allowed to do. Japan would never, as submissive as Japan is, they would never allow the U.S. to do that there. And certainly in the U.S., you would never do that. So why are we firing these live rounds over people's homes? You could hear them buzzing overhead. And we were firing on machine gun and rifle ranges with washed out berms in the back that were supposed to, basically catch the bullets. And I was like, do we even know what's beyond that we might be shooting at? The U.S. officer in charge didn't care at all. So this is something the U.S. always does. They don't care. They don't care about these people. They're not actual allies. They're proxies to be used. They have no interest in their safety or their protection. Ultimately, if it meant advancing U.S. interests, they would feed every single last one of them into proxy war, kind of like what they're doing with Ukraine. So that I just wanted to talk about that. I mean, it's a continuation of what has always been going on. It was one of the things that actually originally woke me up to what the U.S. really was versus what I had believed it was. President, I wanted to point this out also, Danny. I forgot to mention this. Hegseth is talking about maybe they need to expand the U.S. budget. The U.S. spends more on military than like the next 9 or 10 countries combined, including Russia and China. And so they're talking about China expanding their military budget, but compared to the U.S. budget, it's still a tiny fraction of what the U.S. itself spends. And again, if you actually look at what the U.S. is doing to China, it is in direct reaction to what the U.S. is doing to China right off their own shores and even within their own borders. Again, he himself said it in Brussels. They are losing the proxy war in Ukraine. They are out of bullets. They are out of missiles. They don't have anything left to send. They need to put a pin in it for now, get Europe to step in, and they need to pivot over to China because China is advancing rapidly. If you look at the actual policy papers that underpin President Trump's foreign policy, like the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 or the Trump administration Connected America First initiative, all they talk about is confronting and containing China, and which is all the Biden administration talked about and worked toward doing, which is all previous administration, the previous Trump administration, Obama for 8 years. Before that, China was still relatively small and not really on the U.S. radar. But again, it is obviously continuity of agenda, and China is reacting to this, but is ultimately the U.S. provoking this, including right now under the Trump administration. So he's the peace candidate, but he is working on preparing and provoking an even worse war than he did when he was president the first time, when he was arming Ukraine and preparing for and provoking that war, which eventually unfolded.
I actually think that there could be a settlement on Ukraine. Very much could be. Only, though, in my opinion, only if it benefits Russia's side to the largest extent possible. But even if there is a peace settlement, that doesn't necessarily mean that peace is going to, one, hold or even break out. It could still mean a reorientation, especially since all of the early moves indicate reorientation. But with China, there has not been any reorientation. There hasn't been even a single move by the Trump administration to do that, other than some vague, we're going to make a trade deal with China. They did that. They did that in the first administration. They did the trade deal, and the trade deal ended up being leveled with economic war policies, from tariffs to sanctions, and U.S.-China trade actually was really hurt by that.
Well, the tariffs are designed specifically to decouple from China on America's terms. They know that when they provoke this conflict with China, trade is going to stop. And so if they are heavily dependent on China and they don't do anything to decouple before that, it'll be a disaster for the United States. So the tariffs, President Trump himself said during his address to Congress, I don't know if people caught it, but he said it's going to be something like it's going to be uncomfortable or unpleasant in the beginning, but trust him, it'll get better later on, like it did after his first term in office, right? The whole purpose of the tariffs is to start this decoupling incrementally on America's own terms, so that they can separate as much as possible from China to reduce the shock when they finally do get into conflict with China. And only because the U.S. is determined to get into conflict with China, because it is unwilling to accept a nation with a larger population, 4 to 5 times larger industrial base, plenty of resources, the best infrastructure on earth. They're unwilling to accept that a nation like that will just inherently have more power and influence globally. There's no reason why they shouldn't. And there's no reason for the U.S. to be alarmed over this. It is not a threat to the U.S., only a threat to U.S. hegemony well beyond America's own borders. This is what they're fighting over. This is what they are upset about. This is what they claim is at risk. Notice how they always very deliberately throw in American interests. They pretend as if China threatens the U.S. within its borders, but if you read the think tank papers, they admit that that's not true. The only thing China threatens is America's interests all around the world, in other people's countries within their borders, where the U.S. has no business interfering in the first place. And Danny, you're 100% right. Nothing has changed in regards to China. The Biden administration was building up the U.S. Marine Corps specifically as an anti-shipping force to use against China. And now here's President Trump seizing all the maritime choke points, the Panama Canal, Greenland, the Arctic Sea route. They even connected it to maritime trade routes. So that's not me imagining that. That's the Trump administration admitting that. And by the way, I don't know if you were going to get to this, Danny, but what did he announce during his address to Congress, this address that everyone is praising? An American company has begun purchasing the ports on either side of the Panama Canal. Which
yes, we have a
American
conversation.
company, you know, why wouldn't you mention? It's such a great American company. Why wouldn't you? He was giving the spotlight to so many other Americans. Why not this great American company? It's BlackRock, which is the deep state. It is the deep state. The founder, Larry Fink, he works with USAID. BlackRock and USAID work together. USAID will take American tax dollars, invest in like a wind farm project in Kenya, and then BlackRock would come in and privatize all of the profits coming out of it. And there's no plan ever to transfer it over to the people of Kenya, actually. This is exactly what they accuse China of, even though China, in all of their agreements, they always transfer the infrastructure back to the host nation once they make their investment back. BlackRock is just like a parasite, just feeding off of all of these U.S. taxpayer-funded investments. Larry Fink also sits on the board of directors of the International Rescue Committee, which is just a fake humanitarian organization. It's basically a privatized version of USAID, but it also was getting funded by USAID. So that is the deep state. President Trump is working hand in hand with the deep state. So I just don't get why people see this, and like a lot of people aren't even talking about it. They're just pretending that didn't happen because that is inconvenient. How do you explain that if you're talking about Trump, a revolutionary, wrestling the deep state to the ground? It doesn't look like they're wrestling to me.
Fink, the executive of BlackRock, called Donald Trump personally, actually, to make this deal. It was his idea. He got a couple of ports out of it. BlackRock will now control these ports in Panama, and it's not over yet. The Trump administration, all of the right-wing media, quote unquote, they're all saying that this is just phase one. The Trump administration is saying this is just the beginning of what is going to be an ongoing. And this is provocative. I mean, China just made one of the strongest statements you will ever hear come out of China's foreign ministry from its spokesperson. We are ready for any kind of war with the United States. China's ready. And people, I know you said people you know, Brian, have been very enthusiastic. When I was last in China, there were people who were enthusiastic about Trump, getting almost getting assassinated and all that. But in terms of people who really matter, who are like making decisions, and who have any connection to them, people who have any understanding of what they think in China that I've talked to, they're like, they know that this is all, I have contacts over here at the embassy. They know. They're like, we know that things are going to get hairy. They would just be happy for however long of a period it takes to get there, because the Trump administration obviously has the U.S. empire being outstretched. And at any point, it could get pulled in a direction it either doesn't want to go in or it wants to go in, and will be completely mired into that. I'm thinking here, West Asia, that could become another cauldron for the Trump administration at any point, given the U.S.'s dedication and loyalty to Israel, which Trump is very much, definitely on that bandwagon. There's no doubt about it. But Brian, I want you to definitely, when it comes to BlackRock, that's Wall Street. And Wall Street is the deep state, and the deep state is going to be driving China policy here. What do you see coming down the bend? We have the Panama Canal situation, but what else do you see coming down the bend as we move toward this pivot?
Well, the U.S. and again, I highly suggest people do it at least once. Go and just one time listen to one of these 3 to 5 hour. I know it's a long time, but these 3 to 5 hour hearings that they do in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, talking about countering China or the defense industrial base or USAID, and listen to them. Listen to how fundamentally Republicans, Democrats, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, they are all on the same page. They are all pro-American hegemony. They are all pro-corporate America. They are all pro-corrupt, deeply entrenched monopolies because those corrupt, deeply entrenched monopolies put all of them into office, including Trump, by the way, just so you know, and all the people that surround him. I remember listening to now Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth during his confirmation hearing. And we probably talked about this last time, Danny, but maybe not for people that weren't here. That someone was asking him, you said, Mr. Hegseth, that you want to ban U.S. generals from retiring and immediately going into the military-industrial base, basically, working for these arms manufacturers because of the conflict of interest involved. Are you going to hold yourself to the same standards? And he could not say no. He would not say no. And eventually his answer was, well, I'm not a general. Yes, you're only Secretary of Defense. So why would you have to avoid conflict of interest? Which tells me he already has something lined up that he's worried will obviously become public once he's done with his stint. And he will have essentially lied during the hearing, which, you're really not supposed to do. And so these are the type of people that we are pinning our hopes on. These are people that you should not pin any hope on at all. They are telling you their intentions are nefarious. They're telling you they are lying to you if only you listen carefully. Actually, you don't even really have to listen carefully. As Daddy pointed out, thousands of bombs being sent to Israel. For what? How is this America's business? Again, it's on the other side of the planet. Why is this America's business? And I even hear Trump supporters say, well, yeah, maybe his policy on Israel really doesn't add up. Of course it doesn't, and none of it adds up. That one is just the most obvious, but all of his other policies make just as little sense if you really apply critical thinking, if you stop being persuaded by the emotional theater, which is designed specifically to achieve this, to get you to turn off your critical thinking, to suspend disbelief. It's our guy now, and he's a good guy. He's not going to do anything wrong. Well, if you pay attention closely, he is. He obviously is. The administration obviously is. Danny, you asked, what is coming? What is coming is the same thing that has been coming. There's this confrontation with China coming. They are preparing for it. They prepared for it under the Biden administration, the first Trump administration, 8 years of Obama. They're building up the U.S. military specifically to confront China. They know they can't take them on head on, so they are preparing to utilize America's global spanning military infrastructure to cut off Chinese maritime shipping and isolate and cripple the Chinese economy. That is exactly what they're doing with Panama, Greenland, many other things, the whole reorganization of the U.S. Marine Corps, unprecedented. They got rid of all of their tanks. They no longer have tanks because they are solely designed now to fight an anti-shipping war with China. It is coming. The signs are all there, open. It's being done open, out in the open. People just have to look and see. Secretary of State Marco Rubio interfering in Thai-Chinese relations in defense of literal terrorists is a warning sign. Secretary Rubio butting in over Taiwan. The fact that the U.S. State Department's website on U.S.-Taiwan relations has erased the sentence, we do not recognize Taiwan independence. We do not support Taiwan independence. They have erased that because that is the direction they are going toward, compelling the puppet regime in Taipei to declare independence and provoke war with China. That is what is coming.